Cheese. Cheese. Cheese.
What's up, Cheese Squad? This is Cheesehead number 2, and I'm back on my Call of War tutorial series. So this one is going to be for the Doctrines. So right before we get into this one, I'd just like to say that the Axis and the Comintern Doctrines are a bit more noob-friendly than the Pan-Asian Allies Doctrines. That's simply because they're much simpler than the other two, but that doesn't mean that you can't use them. Like, if you're a beginner, you can still use the Allies for Pan-Asian Doctrine. I'm just saying that it's much easier to use the Comintern and Axis Doctrines as a beginner. Alright, so now, I'm going to talk about each doctrine. Now, for the order of this, I'm going to start off talking about the Axis, then Comintern, because they're better for beginners. And then I will go Allies, Pan-Asian. Alright, so starting with the Axis here, they get a plus 15% to their hit points and plus 15% to their damage. This means that the average Axis unit is going to be a whole lot better than the average of the other three. The only downside of that is that they get a plus 10% to their production cost, which basically means that if you build some troops, you're probably going to have a bad economy around day 2 and 3. Which means that you're not going to be able to build as many troops as these other doctrines can. This generally means that the other three doctrines might be able to beat out the Axis doctrine in that area, because they'll have more troops in the Axis. Where the Axis really shines is in that day 1 and the late game. Because in day 1, it doesn't matter how good your economy is, it still takes time to build troops. Which basically means that the Axis will have an extreme early advantage to take over land very, very quickly. Because they have plus hit points and damage. So they start off with the same amount of units as everybody else, but their units are better, so they have extreme early game advantages for quick invasions. But after that, around day 2 or 3, the other doctrines, especially the Comintern, will have extremely much better economies than Axis doctrines, which means that they can build more troops and you'll be overrun. In the late game, which is their next advantage, because usually in the late game, you'll have a good economy anyways, because you'll have so much land, just building so much resources, that it doesn't really matter for that plus 10% production cost. You already have so many resources, it doesn't really matter. So your troops are going to be better than everyone else. The next thing to consider for the Axis is the location of where they are. They have a large location in South America. They have a lot of countries in Africa. They have a lot of countries in Europe. And so if you play in any of those three axes, the Axis doctrine is considerable. So now to the Axis bonuses. So if you use any of these, then the Axis might be the doctrine for you. So if you don't use Militia, then this doesn't really matter for that +1 a day of availability. If you don't use Militia. If you do, you might want to consider a different doctrine. They have bonuses to motorized infantry, which is actually a pretty good unit now. So if you use that, consider the Axis. Although it is going to be hard to build them because you'll have a resource issue. They get a bonus to anti-air. That's not that big of a deal, but it is worth noting. they get a bonus through medium tanks. This is pretty big, because this means that their medium tanks can move pretty close to the light tank speed, with extra hit points on top of their doctrines, 15%. Which means that medium tanks are going to be very good for the Axis, and if you use medium tanks a lot, you might want to use them. For the Air Force, you're going to get pretty nice attack bombers. This means that if you usually face off against enemies that use a lot of tanks, then that's going to be nice. They get a bonus to their submarines. That doesn't mean all that much, unless it's in the early game, but I don't recommend building a navy in the early game, because you'll probably be wasting your resources. So that is the bonuses and abilities for the Axis. So the next one I'm going to talk about is the common term, the other one that's recommended for beginners. So the common term gets minus 15% to their production cost and minus 25 to their upkeep cost. Basically, what that means is when you build troops, you don't need as many resources, and you don't need as many resources to keep those troops. Which means that you'll have a very, very good economy. The only thing is that you get minus 10 damage. So the common term is really good after day 1 and 2. Because at that point, their really good economies can overpower a lot of these other doctrines, who will be out of their resources, and you can just keep on building more and more troops because you have such a good economy compared to everyone else. But in the early game, it's kind of an issue because you get the same amount of troops as everyone else, except this time your damage is worse, which means that you have the risk of losing pretty quickly in the early game. Also, in that late game area where everyone already has a good economy, it doesn't really matter that your economy is good, because most players in the late game have a good economy. So you just get minus 10 damage to all your troops. Okay, so the next thing to consider for the common term is location, because they have 2 countries in South America, 1 in North America, a pretty decent presence in Africa, a pretty good presence in Europe, and a very large presence in Asia. Or if you go by the Call of War continents, they have a very good province in Russia. Last thing to consider before choosing a common term doctrine would be their unit bonuses. So if you use any of these units, might be worth considering. Militia. If you use Militia, this might be the best one for you. They get a 50% mountain bonus and plus 25 urban bonus. This means that they're really good at operating in mountains and cities, which is actually quite a big bonus here. Plus 50 to mountains, like they already have a plus 25 to mountains. That's a big deal, and the plus 25 to urban just makes them pretty decent. For infantry, they have minus 15 upkeep cost and a minus 20 production time. That is actually a very insane infantry bonus. So if you use a lot of infantry, this is a pretty good doctrine for you. The upkeep cost, on top of your bonuses for the upkeep cost already, mean that you can maintain a lot of infantry units. So if you use a lot of infantry, this is going to be good doctrine. And then the minus 20% production time just means that you can make them even, like, faster. For those great bonuses in militia and infantry, they don't really have much else all the way until ordnance. Their artillery gets a minus 10 production cost, which is very nice, because artillery, I find I always lack goods and food. So that is very nice, because artillery takes up a lot of goods. and a minus 20% to their production time is also pretty nice. The next thing they get is better anti-tanks as well. They get a plus 15 damage to light armor and plus 15 damage to heavy armor. So anti-tanks, if you use anti-tanks, and you know how to use anti-tanks very well, the Comintern Doctrine is actually, like, you know, it might be better than the others because the plus 15 damage is higher than the negative 10 damage, so you're actually, like, you actually get better anti-tanks than most of the other doctrines. Of course, the Axis will have better tanks, anti-tanks, because they get a plus 15 damage, and you only get plus 5 technically, because the minus 10 from the Doctrine. So after that, they don't get much more good bonuses. Their medium tank, I mean, like, you can get it pretty early on compared to the others, but that doesn't really matter all that much. The heavy tank gets some nice bonuses, but heavy tanks are quite expensive, and I think your resources would probably be a little bit better spent on infantry, but in the late game, you need something. Heavy tank is going to be pretty good. They get bonuses for the attack bomber availability, so you can actually research attack bombers on day 1. Just like the Axis. So that's alright. I mean, I don't usually use attack bombers on day 1, though. I usually get interceptors instead, because I can actually shoot down people who did get the attack bombers. But that's just me. If you use attack bombers on day 1, consider the Comintern. Or the Axis, because they also get that. But they also get plus damage to infantry and tanks. They don't have a very good navy, as you can see, no bonuses here. They get better cruisers, but cruisers isn't really the big thing for a navy. Like, you get extra hit points, but that's not really gonna change people's opinion on the Doctrine. They can research rocket artillery very, very early on. This is actually, like, quite important, because around day 1, day 2, a lot of people have infantry units, and rocket artillery is really good against infantry units, so that's actually really nice. And then SP rocket artillery is, like, fast rocket artillery. And you get plus damage and move speed, which is quite nice. And they don't get any more bonuses after that. Next up, the Allies. The Allies Doctrine gets a negative 30% to their production time, negative 25% to their research cost and time, and they get a minus 20% to their upgrade costs and time. What that means is that the Allies will be able to spam troops out faster. This doesn't mean that they're going to be able to spam troops, because they won't have the right economy like the Comintern will, but they can make them faster. So if you need troops quickly, if you if you don't produce troops all the time, and then when you're at war, you make troops a lot. If you do that strategy, then the Allies might be a bit better for you, because you build troops faster. But if you don't check your call of war very often, then it won't make much of a difference, because you're not going to be online to move them anyways. The minus 25% time for their end cost for their research only, again, really matters if you check your call of war often. Now, the research cost means that you actually do get a slightly better economy than the Pan-Asian. And a definitely better economy than the Axis, because you won't be spending as much resources on upgrading or researching. It's all just going to be towards improving your economy. The minus 20% to the upgrade cost and time doesn't matter all that much unless you check your Call of War very often. If you don't, then it's not that big of a deal, but you won't be spending as much of your resources upgrading your units, which means that you can spend that upgrading your economy, which means that you'll generally have a better economy than the Pan-Asian and the Axis, but slightly worse than the Comintern. So far, if you check your Call of War often, the Allies is seeming like a very good doctrine. The only thing about them is that they get a minus 10% to the movement speed, which is probably the worst negative quality for any doctrine. Minus 10 to your move speed. This matters a lot in the early to mid game. What that means is, in the early game, your troops are going to be so slow. Players that use the Comintern and Axis doctrines, and especially the Pan-Asian doctrines, are going to be able to completely outflank you. And that's pretty much the same in the mid-game, except in the mid-game, you might have some small infrastructure which can boost your movement speed. And then in the late game, it probably won't matter all too much, because you'll have so much infrastructure because of your economy, that the movement speed it won't matter all that much. So I would say that the Allies are really good if you check your Call of War often. If you set timers, or anything like that, for like when your troops are done or anything, this might be the doctrine for you. They're pretty good early game, and they pretty much get better from there. But if you don't check your Call of War very often, or you really like to go fast, then the Allies is definitely not for you. So now the next thing to consider for the Allies, before we talk about bonuses to units, is location. So, the locations that you might find allies is they have a very strong presence in North America. They have a pretty decent presence in Africa. 3 countries use this doctrine in Europe, and that's basically where you'll find them. So if you play in any of those continents, then the Allies doctrine could be considered. Now, for their bonuses. They don't really get anything for, like, infantry, for, like, the infantry section, except for the commandos, which get a bonus against infantry for their damage, and a movement speed bonus. This actually counters the minus 10, so your commandos will actually be, like, 5% faster than everyone else's commandos, except for Pan-Asian, because they get plus 20 to theirs. But you'll be faster than Comintern and Axis commandos. Paratroopers, this is actually a pretty nice one here. Minus 15 to production cost. This basically means that you're going to be able to spam paratroopers a bit better than the other doctrines. They get bonuses to SP artillery, which is very nice, because SP artillery is kind of required. SP units are kind of required for the Allied doctrine because the units are going to be so slow. And this is a great way to destroy enemy armor while still moving very fast. Because anti-tank guns are better for defense, and SP artillery is better for attack. They get bonuses to their tank destroyers. I don't have a use for tank destroyers, so all this stuff here doesn't really matter to me, because I just use anti-tank guns. But if you use tank destroyers a lot, the Allies have faster ones than the Comintern and Axis, and they're a bit cheaper than the other doctrines. You get a bonus for tactical bombers, and this is actually really nice. They get a plus 15 to their attack range. You can research them on day 1, and they have better damage against lightly armored. This is really good. The only thing is that I only research interceptors on a day 1, and I only build those because I'd rather have more interceptors than a few tactical bombers. They get better strategic bombers with a plus 15 to their range. This is also very, very nice. This means that you're gonna be able to target cities and infrastructure that is a little bit further away, and that's gonna help a lot. Next up, we've got the Destroyer, and this is very good for countering the Axis submarines, because you basically get the exact same bonuses. So if you don't like submarines and you hate facing off against them, Allied Doctrine can help with that. They also can research nuclear stuff much faster than the other doctrines. Which means that if you rush nukes a lot and use resources for that, the Allies is definitely the one you're going to want to go with. The last doctrine to talk about is the Pan-Asian. So the Pan-Asian start off with plus 20% movement speed. So basically, that means that if you like to base your attacks on speed, then Pan-Asian is a very good doctrine for that. Next up, they get a 35% bonus to their view range, so you are less likely to accidentally stumble onto some extremely large stack of enemy troops. That's also a very, very nice bonus right there. The final bonus is 25% to their terrain bonus, and this is actually pretty good for defense. Which means that the Pan-Asian Doctrine is going to be quite good at defending certain spots, as long as you know each unit's terrain bonus. Now for the weakness of the Pan-Asian. Minus 10 hit points. This makes them pretty vulnerable to artillery and to aircraft. And they keep that for the rest of the game. It's not like the other doctrines, for example, the Axis. Once you get to the late game and you have a really good economy, this doesn't really matter all that much. Once you get into the late game with the Pan-Asian, this does matter. You're going to be very weak against enemy aircraft and artillery. Now for the location of the Pan-Asian Doctrine, that would be only in Asia. Now on to unit bonuses. So if there are any units that you like, and they get special bonuses, that's another reason for you to use the Pan-Asian Doctrine. So we start out with an Infantry Bonus, 10% plus hit points, and a plus 25% to Forest and Hills bonus. This is actually crazy. This is pretty much just as good as the Common Terms Infantry bonus. This is actually insanely good. The plus 10 hit points, or 10% hit points, means that you have the exact same health as the Common Term Allies infantry have. So you're going to have just as good infantry as they will, but you get a bonus in your Forest and Hills by 25%. Normally, infantry doesn't have a bonus in that area, so that is actually crazy. They also get bonuses to their artillery, and they do extra damage against infantry, which is really nice, because it's kind of annoying to build rocket artillery and normal artillery, so to get that extra 15% damage off is quite nice. And minus 10% to their production cost basically means that you're going to be able to make more artillery than the Axis or Allies would, because it's much cheaper. You get bonuses to armored cars and to light tanks. And this is really, really good, because I'm noticing here that for the units that you start with, your early game units, that would be your infantry, which you get insane bonuses to. You get your armored cars and your light tanks. These are like the most used early game units. So if you use, well, most people do use light tanks. And not very many use armored cars, but if you use armored cars, this is the best doctrine to use for armored cars. They also get a very nice bonus to the Interceptor, with more attack range, which is actually insane. That means that you're going to be able to attack enemy interceptors or bombers from further away, so you don't have to build as many air bases. You also get plus 15% damage to enemy aircraft, which is also very, very nice. This means that you're basically going to be able to shoot down enemy planes way more effectively. They also get better naval bombers, and this is also a very, very nice unit bonus here. This unit bonus makes it so that you get plus 15% damage to ships and to submarines, and that's actually like really, really good. So if you build an air force, then this is definitely very much an option. You also get better battleships. That's not, I mean, like, that important. They get better damage against every unit, and plus to hit their hit points. That's not as big as the other ones. I mean, I don't use battleships all that much, so there you go. And they get a bonus to their flying bomb. I mean, that's kind of nice, but I don't use the flying bomb at all. I just research it to get the rocket. And the last thing to note for the unit bonuses is that it takes 2 days longer than the Axis and Comintern doctrines, and 4 days longer than the Allied doctrines to build nuclear weapons. So if you build nuclear weapons, I don't really recommend the Pan-Asian Doctrine. Alright, so now to my final thoughts. For the Axis Doctrine, they're going to be very good if you have a decent kill-death ratio. If you lose a lot of units, you're not going to be able to build them back very well. And also, since you're going to have a bad economy, you're not going to be able to build higher level buildings. So I recommend the Axis Doctrine if you have a decent kill-death ratio, and that you're good at managing an economy. I would recommend the Comintern Doctrine to anyone with either if you have a pretty bad kill-death ratio, because your units, if you lose one unit, it doesn't mean as much as if you lose one Axis unit. And I would also recommend the Comintern Doctrine if you like to spam troops, because especially for the Axis, after like 5 hours, I'd say, you're gonna run out of resources. But with the Comintern Doctrine, you can upgrade your economy and build troops, which isn't something the Axis Doctrine can't say. If you like to spam troops, and just win with numbers, and you like to use infantry units, because if you like to use like tanks and stuff, they don't really get any good bonuses to that. They get mainly bonuses in their infantry and militia. So if you want to spam those kind of troops, or you have a bad kill-death ratio, Comintern might be for you. Now for the Allies, I'd say that I'd recommend the Allies Doctrine to anyone where you check your call of war very often, or you don't attack people very early on. Because if you're on the attack early on, as the Allies, not good. But if you wait a couple days without having war at all, then you'll have higher researched units than everyone else, which means that your units will even be better than the Axis. But the Axis will have the early game advantage, while you'll have a more late game advantage. So this is more recommended for people that are a bit patient and check their call of war often. This is definitely not recommended to very, very aggressive players. Simply just because of the -10 move speed. You'll find your armies marching very, very slowly. If you build nuclear weapons, I would also recommend the Allies, as they're the best option for that. Now for the Pan-Asian Doctrine. Final thoughts on that. I would recommend this to aggressive players who use movement speed as the key advantage to their attack. If you are more of a slow attacker, you like to take your time when you're attacking, let the morale improve from the areas you just conquered, or stuff like that, then the Pan-Asian Doctrine is definitely not good for you. If you don't like to build air forces and you would rather focus on your army or a navy, Pan-Asian Doctrine is definitely not for you. Because the bombers from the enemies will be able to do a much more damage to your units. If you don't check your Call of War very often, then this isn't going to be a very good one, because you're not going to be maximizing any of these abilities. So if you are not very patient, then the Pan-Asian Doctrine might be for you. You get extra bonus to your move speed, and that means that you'll be able to make progress faster. Make sure to let me know in the comments what doctrine you think that you're going to be using. And that's going to be it for this video. So don't forget to like and subscribe. And the question for you today is, do you like cheese?